leaner organisation that offers better value to licence fee payers, and we agree with this. Ultimately, the settlement strikes the right balance between protecting households and allowing broadcasters to deliver their vital public responsibilities, whilst also encouraging them to make further savings and efficiencies. Mr Speaker, the licence fee settlement is only one step in our roadmap for reform of the BBC. In the last few months, I've made it clear that the BBC needs to address issues around impartiality and groupthink. Those problems were highlighted definitively by the recent Sirota review, and the BBC's own leadership rightly recognised those findings in full and committed to deliver all of the review's recommendations in its 10-point action plan on impartiality and editorial standards. And I have had constructive discussions with the BBC about these issues in recent months. But the BBC now needs to put those words into action. It needs to convince the British public that those changes are in fact being made and to provide regular and transparent accounts of its progress. We will shortly begin the midterm review of the BBC's charter, which will consider the overall governance and regulation of the BBC, and a key part of that review will look at whether the BBC's action plan on impartiality has in fact materially contributed to improving the internal governance of the organisation. But it's also time to look further into the future. Mr Speaker, as any serious commentator will tell you, the broadcasting landscape has changed beyond all recognition over the past decade. We're living in a world of streaming giants, of on-demand and on pay-per-view and smart TVs. Technology is changing everything. 97% of homes already have super-fast broadband. A family in Cumbria can stream 5 different movies in 5 different rooms in its house at any one time. And our gigabit rollout is transforming those networks even further. Over 65% of UK households now have access to the fastest connection on the planet. As the tech has changed, so have audience habits, particularly amongst younger viewers. So it's time to begin asking those really serious questions about the long-term funding model of the BBC and whether a mandatory licence fee with criminal penalties for individual households is still appropriate. As we have said before, we will therefore undertake a review of the overall licence fee model, and those discussions will begin shortly. Mr Speaker, the BBC has been entertaining and informing us for 100 years, and I want it to continue to thrive and be a global beacon in the UK and in the decades to come. But this is 2022, not 1922. We need a BBC that is forward-looking and ready to meet the challenges of modern broadcasting. A BBC that can continue to engage the British public and that commands the support from across the breadth of the UK, not just the London bubble. A BBC that can thrive alongside Netflix and Amazon Prime and all of its other challenges which attract younger viewers. The licence fee settlement represents a significant step in that journey and in our wider reform of the BBC. I look forward to continuing working with the BBC and others across the industry over the coming years to secure the future of these vital British services. I commend this statement to the House.
I now come to the Shadow Secretary of State, Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I completely agree with you that it's a disgrace that announcement of this importance was not first made to Parliament, and I look forward to the leak inquiry that you mentioned as well. May I take this opportunity to congratulate the Secretary of State for coming top of the teachers' pet list. She was the first Cabinet Minister to tweet support for the Prime Minister. She was the first to volunteer to do a broadcast round. And now she's been the first to throw up a distraction and in finding someone else to blame for the Prime Minister's disintegrating leadership. reporting, of course. The licence fee deal must be fair to fee payers, whilst ensuring the BBC can do what it does best. There should be no blank cheques. However, the government claims this is all about the cost of living crisis. I mean, pull the other one. What is it about the £13.57p a month that marks it out for such immediate and special attention to address the cost of living over the £1,200 a year increase in energy and household bills, or the £3,000 a year taxes increases that her government has imposed? Is the licence fee really at the heart of the cost of living crisis? Or is this really about their long-standing vendetta against the BBC? Now it's part of Operation Red Meat to save the Prime Minister from becoming dead meat. Apparently, negotiations with the BBC hadn't even been finalised when the Culture Secretary gave the details to the Sunday newspaper on the very weekend the Prime Minister's position was most in peril. I leave it to you and others, Mr Speaker, to judge the timing of that. She has proven today the Conservatives may know the price of the licence fee, but not its value. The last time they targeted it, the over 75s paid the price. So what assessment has she made of the impact of this 2-year freeze on BBC output and commissioning and on the wider creative industries more broadly? Is she happy to become the Secretary of State for repeats? But this isn't enough. Oh, there's more coming, there's more coming. We've got lots of fun to be had with this, don't worry. But this isn't enough red meat for the Culture Secretary. She won't stop until her cultural vandalism has destroyed everything that's great about Britain. Vandalism is exactly what it is: to tweet on a Sunday with no notice, no discussion or thought, the end to the unique funding of the BBC altogether, without any clue as to what will replace it. So perhaps she will explain how the BBC will continue valued services that just wouldn't be commercially viable. First, how can it continue to support local journalism where so many have recently failed? In many areas, the BBC is the last local news desk standing. Second, how would a commercial-only BBC be able to play such a crucial role, as it has done, to levelling up and growing the creative industries across our regions and nations, from Cardiff to Salford and elsewhere? They're silent on that one. I support the increased funding for S4C, but they claim to support the union. So what assurance can she provide for the continuation of distinct broadcasting in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland when there's no licence fee? Third, would her cutback BBC be able to continue with the World Service and its global soft power, which her government's review only last year described as the most trusted broadcaster worldwide? Would it? Finally, what would happen to BBC Learning, Bite Size and children's educational programming, which frankly did a much better job than the government did of getting high-quality education into children's homes during lockdown when they couldn't even provide an iPad? The impartiality of the BBC is crucial to trust in it. By explicitly linking the charter renewal to the BBC's editorial...
Order. Quite rightly, I wanted to the Secretary of State in silence. I expect the same respect to be given to the Shadow Secretary of State. And those voices that I keep hearing, I know who's behind the mask, so let me reassure you that if you want to go out early, don't let me help you on your way. Lucy Powell.
I actually know that the honourable member is a big fan of mine, but he's just trying to hide it behind his mask secretly. The impartiality of the BBC is crucial to trust in it. By explicitly linking the charter renewal to the BBC's editorial decisions, the government sounds more like a tin pot dictatorship than a healthy democracy. The BBC creates great quality, British-produced programming from royal weddings to Strictly Come Dancing to Great British Drama and championing of new music. It's at the cutting edge of harnessing the digital age. Of course it needs to change with the times and review its output and reach, but it is a well-loved, trusted British treasure. It is the envy of the world. But the government is in trouble, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is casting around for people to blame, and the Culture Secretary has stepped up to provide some red meat. Well, it won't work. This is not how the future of our jewel in the crown and the cornerstone of our world-leading creative industries should be determined. She will have a fight on her hands if she wants to destroy it. Thank you.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think there are about 30 questions in that statement, so I'll try just to address the top points. So, first of all, Mr. Speaker, it is nobody's intention to destroy the BBC. In fact, I completely agree with the Honourable Lady, it is a beacon. But the BBC licence fee is not a small amount of money for families who are working hard across the UK, struggling to pay that bill or face bailiffs at their door or a court appearance in a magistrate's court. Who are we to say it is a small amount of money? That is a disgrace. It is a significant sum. It is also regressive. Whether you are getting by on a minimum wage or on a multi-million-pound presenter's salary, you fork out the same amount of money. That is not right. Only those who haven't faced hard choices on what they can or can't afford for their families on a weekly basis would claim that it was a small amount of money. And as a point of principle, we cannot add to that bill at a time when every family is facing pressure on their wallets. So would the Honourable Lady like to indicate from a sedentary position, does she support freezing the licence fee for 2 years and helping those hard-pressed families? Does she support it? Is that a no? She's shaking her head. So the Honourable Lady does not support freezing the licence fee to help those hard-pressed families who need every bit of help in the face of rising global energy costs and rising pressures on inflation. The Honourable Lady has declined to help those hard-working families. And, Mr. Speaker, what we are saying is that moving forward, we need to decide and discuss and debate. So bring it on, everybody in this House. Let's discuss what a BBC in 2027 will look like. It is not a policy. We're announcing a debate and a discussion. Let's all get involved positively.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that I'm not impressed by either the process or the proposal, and I don't think it necessarily leads to progress either. I'd be grateful to know whether there's an assessment of alternatives when they were put to Cabinet subcommittees, when the Cabinet considered this proposal, and why it is that this is the one thing where a government minister will claim that you can't have any kind of increase because of people being short of money. Other things that government run are linked to RPI or CPI. It seems to me that it would be better to have a discussion in this House as to whether we should have a moderated increase during the remaining years of this charter, and also that if she didn't say this is the last time there's going to be a charter with a subscription, could you please put the options in front of this House so that people like me who say if the choice is between the United States or the state, public broadcasting for the BBC and Channel 4 is better, in my view, than having everything go to some of the big media people around the world who won't maintain the kind of BBC which we've had for the last 100 years.
So, Mr. Speaker, the decision as to what the future funding model looks like is for discussion It's not. It isn't even. Some of us may not even be here by the time 2028 arrives, but it is up for discussion, and that's what we need to decide moving forward. And I have the greatest respect for the Father of the House. He knows that. I've known him for 20 years. But I honestly cannot agree with the point that the BBC can just year after year after year continue to ask for more money from the British public. I just do not agree with that premise. I'm afraid that the BBC do not be under any illusion. They are going to continue to receive billions of pounds, even under this settlement, £23 billion over the course of this Charter to 2027 of public money. We cannot justify, in the face of rising inflationary pressures, increasing global energy prices, we cannot go to the British public and say, pay more, and if you don't, a bailiff will be on your door.
Spokesperson John Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, and thanks also to the Secretary of State for advance copy of the statement. Not that we needed an advance copy, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State shared her thoughts with Twitter, plus ça change. Now, we all know the timing is to distract from the Prime Minister. The Secretary of State claims that this move will protect pensioners from court cases. This argument, of course, is disingenuous nonsense. It was this Conservative government which abolished the automatic free licence fees for the over 75s. If pensioners are struggling with the current BBC fee rate of 43 pence a day, imagine how they'll cope with the cost of a Netflix Sky subscription model. Everybody knows it, less programming at a greater cost. Now, the Secretary of State has spoken about exploring the options for the BBC, but in reality, I suspect her mind is well made up. She let this slip in the Select Committee when she said to me, and I quote, "How do I even know if the BBC is going to be going in 10 years' time?" Some custodian of public service broadcasting. The hostility towards the BBC and its future does not stem from a desire to protect pensioners, but rather from a visceral loathing of the Prime Minister's critics. Now, the Tory right hates the BBC almost as much as it hates Channel 4. That's why the Culture Secretary, a doting Prime Ministerial loyalist, is so determined to destroy both. She doesn't want to see Krishnan Gurumurthy, lead presenter of Channel 4 News, or Nick Robinson, a former chair of the Young Conservatives, no less, and now lead presenter on the Today programme, pin the Prime Minister or his slippery apologist down. Mr. Speaker, she knows, does she not, that the Tory right wants the broadcast media to be as sycophantic as most of the print press, offering fawning adulation to their leader. If the BBC is felled and Channel 4 privatised, free speech will be the victim, and we know, don't we, Mr. Speaker, that the result will be yet more obsequious, unquestioning news.
Mr. Speaker, I have no idea how anyone could make the leap from let's have a debate and a discussion in this House to how the future funding looks to privatisation. It's just, I have no further comment.
We now come to the Chair of the Select Committee, Julian Knight.
Mr. Speaker, speaking strictly personally, I welcome the freeze and the overt commitment to wean the BBC off the licence fee. As Lord Grey said on the Today programme this morning, nearly £160 is nothing to Gary Lineker, but it's a lot to our constituents. But I and the House would like more details, please, as to whether the licence fee will stop in 2028 or be phased out. The latter, in my view, gives the best chance of preserving the BBC's status in our national culture. And how is moving to alternative funding models going to work, given, first of all, the paucity of broadband coverage, old technology like Freeview being embedded in the system, and whether central government funding, which has been muted, could stand up legally and also measure the key issue of impartiality?
So, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his comments and his support on the freeze. I just have to take issue with the paucity of broadband, though. 97% of homes in the UK have superfast broadband, and that's and as I said, 97% of homes have superfast broadband, and we are rolling out gigabit. In fact, if you're in a house in Cumbria, you can download, as I said in my mistake, five videos, 5 movies in 5 different rooms in the house. So we don't have a paucity. And with regard to whether the licence fee will be phased out, what a future funding model will look like, those discussions, that analysis hasn't even begun. But everybody in the house is to be part of those discussions, should be part of those discussions, and will be. And I imagine that the DCMS Select Committee will be doing some very important work on this moving forward in terms of establishing a future funding model. And it is work that will continue in the future.
Clive Efford.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State say what impact assessment she's done that tells her about the impact that this change will have on households if the fees were increased, and also what the impact is going to be on services provided by the BBC as a consequence of these freezes in their income, on top of the 31% that they've had cut from income over the past 10 years, and how that will affect the services that are provided by the BBC, and how will they survive her plans for the BBC?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Speaker, we've been negotiating with the BBC over, both I and my predecessor, over a considerable period of time. The BBC will be meeting its mission and core purpose, and in terms of impact assessment, I think the most important impact assessment is that fewer families will end up in a magistrate's court.
Let me agree.
Like many of the best things in this country, the BBC licence fee is something that may not work in theory, but works really well in practice, shown by very low levels of evasion. There are, of course, many alternative ways of funding it, but as the Select Committee that my Right Honourable friend referred to concluded last year, the government either needs to come out with a strong alternative to the licence fee that it can put to Parliament, or strongly support the current model for at least the next charter period, 2028 to 2038. Does she have that alternative on offer?
I thank my friend for his contribution, and we must. I'm afraid we differ in our opinion, and I think we have 5-6 years. That is plenty of time to decide what a future funding model would look like.
Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We abolished the radio licence fee in 1979 and moved to a TV licence fee. So I myself am not against moving towards an internet licence fee or something like this. But we need to know the details, the thresholds, the amount of money that will be raised from those things. Does the Secretary of State accept that her announcement that this would be the last licence fee, without going through the consultation first, was reckless?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, in 2027 or 28, when it starts, many of us may not even be here. We're talking 6 years away. I welcome my honourable friend's contribution. I look forward to him being part of the discussion and debate about what we do in the future.
Brian.
The State will know that the Select Committee report that my honourable friend from Ashford just referred to acknowledges its very first recommendation that government will need to act to ensure public service broadcasting remains sustainable in today's global media marketplace. So in that sense, I'm really glad that we're having the debate, even if I am a little unclear as to where it came from this weekend. So could I ask my right honourable friend, given that report is also clear the government need to have this credible view on what any alternative to the licence fee might be, and indeed we say what their vision is for the future of public service broadcasting, could I just ask my right honourable friend, what are her instincts as she kicks off this welcome national debate?
So I thank my honourable friend for his contribution, and my instincts are let's start the discussion. Let's have a look at this is what I'm starting, Mr. Speaker. Unless, of course, members of the House would just like us to decide and not have the debates and not have the discussion, but that's where we're going. We're going to start that discussion We're going to start that. Well, the Honourable Lady is speaking from a sedentary position, Mr Speaker, which maybe she'd like to say and confirm. Does she support the freeze to the licence fee? Does she support a yes or a no, a nod or a shake would be great? No? There you go. We have it there. No.
Sorry, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much. Despite the removal of the free licence fee for over 75s being a result of her own party's actions, the Secretary of State's tweet yesterday indicated that her attack on the BBC was due to the over 75s being threatened with prison sentences and bailiffs knocking on their doors. Yet, less than 2 weeks ago, she told this House that no enforcement action has been taken against anyone over 75 years of age. I know, Mr Speaker, that the Secretary of State would not make such claims without the evidence, so can she please now share with the House what data she found to support yesterday's comments?
The Honourable Lady drew a direct link between two different parts of my tweet, and there is no direct link. It's just one of many reasons why I want to look at how we fund a great British institution moving forward in the future.
Freeze the licence fee. However, the conversation over the future of the licence fee is far from over. What steps will the Secretary of State take to protect the BBC's local services, the services that those who pay for it watch and enjoy, before the knives are sharpened within the BBC?
So the conversation hasn't actually started, and that's and my other friend makes local radio is a very important point. Someone made the point about local BBC news coverage. And I would just say many of those in our constituencies used to have lots of independent news coverage as well in the past, which is no longer there, which was, some may say, the dominance of the BBC locally helped to contribute to that. But we haven't, and I would urge my honourable friend, he has some very important points to make and experience in local radio. I would urge him to be part of the discussion and to help us frame what it would look like moving forward.
Speaker. Growing up, my cousins overseas always told me they listened to the BBC when they wanted to know the truth. Yeah. And I now represent somewhere known as BBC Borough. There's that many ex-employees, including myself, around. So could you tell all of us, where exactly was this in the Conservative manifesto? Because already people are seeing it as just a distraction for Partygate. And also, as someone who I remember seeing, I have fond memories of her in my constituency on reality TV on Channel 4. Does her trashing public service broadcasting apply to them too? Because that's a great Thatcherite innovation.
Excellent question. I'm not going to conflate Channel 4 with the BBC. I'm here to talk about the settlement of the licence fee. But, the second part of the question got me, I can't remember the first part. But there was no, she made a really important point about the BBC World Service. And the BBC will be able to, with the billions of pounds and the billions of funding, £23 billion it's receiving, still be able to meet its core mission and purposes.
Be right.
Very much, Speaker. My right honourable friend must be right that the BBC can't stand still while the rest of the world moves along. But would she accept that when we think about the future funding of the BBC, we have to consider both the content that is marketable and which is going to be commercially successful, and the content that is not, but which will act as the beacon she describes, not just to this country, but to the rest of the world in quality broadcasting and news and current affairs content in particular. And isn't that kind of content likely to continue to need subsidy in any future funding model we design?
So thank you for that contribution. He's absolutely right. One of the things we don't want is for all of our TV, which is streamed into the UK, to come from overseas. The discussion and the debates that we have about the future funding formula are going to have to include how we both protect, preserve, create great British content. And that has to be part of the debate moving forward. How can I tell about elements? No, I can't, because we haven't even begun the discussions yet. What modelling is there? There are a number of ways that I've been told already that we could look at funding the BBC moving forward. Well, it's not for me to decide. So We have to. It's not for me to decide until I have all the information and all the evidence.
Ms Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I just say to the Secretary of State, I wish I had the level of broadband coverage that she talks about in my constituency.
You're not alone.
When I was a councillor, a member of the Highland Council, I had to be very careful of the BBC because their reporting of all I said and did was very thorough indeed. And that was good for local democracy. Can I also say to the benches opposite that the coverage of the Scottish Government has been very thorough, and in the time of the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, it was so thorough that it reduced the then First Minister to near apoplexy, members will recall. So, a slimmed-down BBC may not be able to deliver this sort of service that's good for local democracy and for Scottish democracy. Could I ask the Secretary of State how she intends to make sure that we do not lose out on that front?
Well, democracy, particularly local democracy, is at the heart of a lot of what the BBC does. And that's why it will be an important element of conversations that we have moving forward and an important contribution. And as I've said a number of times, the discussions, the debates which we will have in this place, the evidence that we will take moving forward, it hasn't begun. We're 7 years away. That's the consultation that we will have here, the evidence that we will gather here, the debates and discussions that we will have, those discussions will start shortly. We're talking about a new funding model which will start in 2028.
John Whittingdale.
My right honourable friend will be aware that last year the number of TV licences purchased fell by 700,000, and that more and more young people are now saying that they don't need to watch the BBC because of the enormous amount of choice through the streaming services. Does she agree that even despite that increase in content, we will still need public service broadcasting in the BBC, and therefore it is right to have a debate about the future funding model, not to undermine the BBC, but to ensure that it can survive going forward?
I thank my friend, and that was my response to my earlier question. How do we keep good content, great British content made in the UK? The BBC is a national institution. How do we maintain the BBC? The question is not, do we or don't we have a BBC? The question going forward is, how do we fund the BBC moving forward? I know my honourable friend has made some interventions of his own and ideas of his own. I look forward to him furthering those moving forward.
Can I just say, many of us will find it nauseating that a minister comes here to talk about hard-pressed families when she supported a £20 cut in universal credit. But it's interesting that the minister wants to come to this, I'm sure, in terms of objectively the fullest information. So could we test how much she considered some of these factors, maybe in the style of the broadcast media? So could she tell us how much more money is generated per pound by the investment in the BBC? Is it £1, £2 or £3? She talks about the North. How much impact, economic impact, is actually beyond London of the BBC? Is it 10% or 20% or 50%? Maybe she could just demonstrate her knowledge, at least, of the impact of the BBC now.
So, Mr. Speaker, the specific figures across the UK I will write to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 11 years ago, the then Director General of the BBC said the corporation would have to do fewer things better. The current Director General has set the organisation the challenge of prioritising how it spends its money and maximising its commercial revenues. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that reform is necessary for the BBC to thrive in the digital age, both in terms of how it works and how it's funded?
Thank my honourable friend for his informed question. You know, we can't ignore the fact that our digital landscape is transforming rapidly and that we are advancing at a huge pace, and that has resulted in people changing the way they view their viewing habits, the way they view their content, and particularly the younger generation. That is why we would be dinosaurs if I stood here and said, I would be accused of being a dinosaur if I stood here and said, we just let it go on, we just let the BBC carry on as it is, and we just assume that into the future we will carry on with this licence fee model. And as my honourable friend has highlighted, 700,000 people, fewer, bought the licence fee. We have to do something now in order to sustain the BBC and to maintain the British beacon that we have in the BBC moving forward. We have to act now to ensure that the BBC remains the BBC and it's here for the future.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, can I welcome the fact that at long last we have a minister who is prepared to grasp this nettle and to tackle the BBC poll tax and also stop the enforcement of payments by people who are angered by the bias of the BBC, and also force that organisation to look at its own bloated expenditure, and especially given that broadcasting is now changing to allow people greater choice. I hope that despite the cries of outrage from the BBC bodies in this House shall not back down on these issues.
I thank my honourable friend for his support, and I think it's just worth making the point that the BBC will continue to receive billions of pounds of funding, of public support and funding between now and 2027.
Sir John Redwood.
Will she decriminalise the licence fee to take the pressure off magistrates' courts? Shouldn't this be a household bill like others?
So it's something that we are keeping under review, and I would say as part of the discussions moving forward, you know, a model for the BBC of a licence fee paid by individuals with the potential threat of bailiffs or criminal prosecution is just, in today's age, really, is that how we're going to continue moving forward? And it's an important question and one that will be part of the discussion.
Ryan.
The establishment of the BBC in Salford, neighbouring my constituency, has created many excellent jobs for my constituents and has been both an economic and a cultural driver of success in the North West. But that isn't what I wanted to ask the Secretary of State about. Can she say what guarantees she can give to the BBC's excellent, world-class, salaried orchestras, like the BBC Philharmonic, whose concerts I've had the great privilege to attend as their guest?
So, Mr Speaker, the BBC, as I've said, will continue to receive billions of pounds worth of funding. It will continue to meet its mission and core purpose, but I can't dictate how the BBC spends its money or have any editorial control. It's up to the BBC how they decide that they spend their licence fee settlement.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement and to recognise the priority she has placed within it on Welsh language broadcasting and the importance that it has on the Welsh-speaking community in Wales. In supporting her statement and in helping the BBC achieve its objectives under the new settlement, will my right honourable friend call on the BBC to follow other public sector organisations, improve their transparency and to publish every invoice in excess of £500, just like every other organisation?
Well, S4C plays a vital role in supporting the Welsh economy, culture and society. This funding will support S4C in reaching more Welsh language speakers, including younger audiences. And I'm very sure that S4C has just heard what he said, and I will certainly take his points back.
Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Let's talk about value for money. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that 43 pence a day is value for money for BBC iPlayer, BBC Sounds, BBC World Service?
It's billions of pounds. And I don't believe that if you asked any family who was receiving repeated letters or a bailiff knocking on the door or a request to appear at a magistrate's court would think that it was value for money because it's money they can't afford. The issues that working families and those who are hard-pressed in the situation that we have with rising inflationary pressures think it is difficult to pay £159 a year out of their income, which is why we're freezing that money for the next 2 years and not allowing it to rise.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement because household bills are under pressure, and I think it is reasonable to freeze the fee for 2 years. In the whole of the conversation, Mr. Speaker, and outside of this place and in this debate, we talk about television and we talk about the streaming services. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that when the conversation takes place, we will have to make sure that the very important radio programmes across the board of the BBC are protected and are still funded, and we can't just compare it to a Netflix Apple model because radio is such a key part of the BBC's output?
It absolutely is, and I think it will be a key part of the discussion. And you know, you mentioned, I think it was Apple and Netflix, and it's not the BBC's role to compete in a competitive way with other providers, but radio is certainly a huge part of the BBC and will be a huge part of the discussion.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Over the generations, people all over the world, some in fear of their lives, have huddled around their radios, straining to hear the words, "This is London," because they trust BBC World Service News. Given that a subscription service will never work for airwave radio, what assurance can the Secretary of State give those listeners and the House that the BBC's service to the world, which is the BBC World Service, will be able to continue to do its job?
Well, my friend has jumped the gun in mentioning the words subscription service. I haven't mentioned subscription service. I've said that we need to have a debate and a discussion about how the BBC is funded moving forward in the future. And I completely understand his point, but how the BBC spends its money that it receives via the Charter is the BBC to decide how it spends. We don't have any influence over that.
Andy Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State is absolutely right that we should be debating and discussing the future of the BBC. She mentioned in her statement two of the important elements of the Charter: to entertain and inform. Of course, there is a third one as well, to educate. And that is the area of public service media that is most difficult to commercialise. Can she assure me that she will ensure that that element of the BBC is protected going forward?
Well, I hear his point, and I think a lot of people agree with him. And people have talked about the bite-sized contribution that BBC made during the pandemic, which is absolutely vital to many families who were homeschooling children at home. And I will bear his comments in mind and take them back.
Davie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree with me that having shown in the past week that the government has shown contempt for the British people, today's announcement on the BBC shows they treat the British institutions with contempt as well?
No.
Peter Bone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Friday, I introduced my private member's bill to abolish the BBC was to be read a second time. Unfortunately, there was not enough parliamentary time to proceed. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I publish quite a lot of private members' bill, and sometimes I get some support and sometimes I get some opposition. Getting rid of the BBC licence fee, tens of thousands of people supported it, and very few were against it. So can I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House today and make a statement? And if my bill is any use to her, I'd be very happy to change in committee any of the stuff I have there at the moment.
Thank you, and I look forward to that.
Kevin Jones.
The Secretary of State has come to the House today to basically say the freeze in the licence fee is to help hard-working, struggling families. Can I ask her, though, could she answer the question that was put to her by the Father of the House? When was this decided? Did it go through a Cabinet subcommittee? Did Cabinet sign this off? Or is it that just over the last weekend we thought we'd come up with something which would take the attention away from the Prime Minister?
Yeah, Cabinet has signed it off. These negotiations have been going on with my predecessor as well as myself. I legally had to make my statement in as much time as possible before April, which is why I'm making it today.
Hugh Merriman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I often find those who are best placed to give their view on whether we need the BBC or not are those that have lived, worked, travelled abroad and haven't had access to the BBC. And therefore, I applaud the constituent that's written to me, having done just that, and said the BBC needs to be celebrated and maintained because he sees what a future looks like in this country without the BBC. Can I ask the Secretary of State, given that inflation is expected to rise to 6% in the early parts of this year,
what elements of conversation she's had about which content will be reduced as a result of this decision that she's making today.
So I thank my old friend for his contribution. Can I just say that I ran a school in Africa for a year, and I understand the value of the BBC World Service because I was a listener of the BBC World Service for a whole 12 months. And therefore I, having lived in Africa and run a school in Africa for a year, also know the importance of the BBC. And it's why I've said all along, this discussion is not about do we have a BBC or don't we? It's about how do we maintain a BBC moving forward in a rapidly changing, modernising landscape? How do we fund the BBC in that event? So that is what the discussion's about moving forward, not whether or not there is a BBC.
Kirsty Blackman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm no fan of the regressive licence fee, but the Secretary of State saying on Twitter that this will be the last licence fee announcement is discourteous to this House, it's discourteous to all of the many people that watch and listen to BBC, and it's discourteous to all of those who are employed by the BBC. How does she believe that the 50 BBC employees based in my constituency are currently feeling because of the announcement she made on Twitter over the course of the weekend?
Mr. Smith, I think on Instagram it's likely to be, because I cannot see a world, and I don't think many people can, see a world in 2028 where individual households are paying an outdated funding fee that was established in 1922 to fund an organisation that I don't think anybody could ever have seen what the digital landscape would be like today, or the viewing habits of young people today, or indeed what the opportunities will be in 2028.
Matt Morman.
Speaker. In some ways, the BBC is the best of global Britain, but in a globalised media landscape, we know that there are people prepared to pay for Netflix, for all those subscription services, and for web services, and for all the multitude of things the BBC offers. Isn't it daft that someone would suggest that she should stand up today and say, even from 2028 to 2038, you have to pay for the whole lot, whatever you want?
Yes.
So, and it's to my, and I thank my friend for his contribution and for his contribution to the department for the time that he was there, and he's absolutely right. It's to the point that it's not about do we have our great British institution of the BBC, which is globally recognised. That's not the question. The question is we live in a different world. People have different and changing viewing habits. And that, by the time we reach 2027, is going to be even, we can't even, I know when I started some of the negotiations, when my predecessor started some of the negotiations on this, TikTok didn't even exist. You know, we're moving rapidly to a different place, and that's why we have to have the debate.
Tulip Sadiq.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my constituents have written to me in praise of the recent BBC investigative documentary about the cladding scandal. One of my constituents, who lives herself in a dangerously clad house, talked about how much she appreciated the fact that there was an independent state broadcaster that challenged unethical companies. It was the BBC, may I remind the House, that revealed that warnings about cladding quality issues had been ignored for years. So could I ask the Secretary of State, does she recognise how crucial the investigative role of the BBC is? And in this discussion that she keeps talking about, can she assure the House that her proposals will not cut the budget for the investigative programmes of the BBC?
I don't set the budgets for the investigative programmes on the BBC. The BBC does that.
We know. Sir Edward Lee.
Clearly reform is needed. It's absurd in the modern world that people can be criminalised for not paying for a licence fee just for an entertainment show. But the devil is in the detail. I represent a very rural constituency where many smaller villages and hamlets can't get super-fast broadband. So before any final decisions are made or this reform is implemented, can we ensure that if we base public policy on the basis that everybody can stream programmes, they can actually stream programmes?
I thank my friend on the policy. There is no policy. We're just starting a discussion and debate, but it isn't based on whether people can achieve streaming or not. But 100% of households achieving superfast broadband or gigabit broadband actually is the objective.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I heard what the Secretary of State said about S4C, but my constituents in Cardiff South and Penarth would simply not recognise what she says about the BBC, the rest of the BBC being some sort of London bubble. We've seen a 54% increase in our creative economy locally, thousands of people employed. BBC at the heart of that, Doctor Who, Casualty, programmes like Shreds, the BBC National Orchestra of Wales. It's absolutely crucial. Every pound invested in our local economy by the BBC generates almost double that in return. Does she not accept that what she's suggesting today puts that at risk and puts many of those jobs and opportunities that we've seen in Cardiff, including in deprived communities, at risk?
Madam Deputy Speaker, S4C are going to receive a further £7.5 million per annum from the licence fee to support its digital investment. In total, this will provide S4C with approximately £88 million in licence fee funding per annum. And it's S4C we are committed to S4C, and we are providing additional funding to S4C.
Mr McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a former BBC and ITV journalist, I look forward to taking part in discussions about the future of the BBC. I'm a big admirer of local and regional BBC journalism, the local democracy reporter scheme, for example, the coverage of rugby league and local football, which wouldn't maybe happen on any other platform. But just in terms of Yorkshire and the location of the new headquarters of Channel 4, how does today's announcement impact on the timescale for the future announcements about the future of Channel 4, please?
I've made no announcements other than we're starting a discussion about the future funding of the BBC, and I'm here to make the statement on the settlement of the licence fee. I'm not conflating Channel 4 with this.
Catherine McKinnell.
Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State for Culture does not appear to be being straight with the House, because her tweet at the weekend said very clearly, this licence fee announcement will be the last. I'm reading it from Twitter. And that is why many of my constituents are concerned that the BBC's unique range of programming that brings together nations, regions and diverse communities in the UK are not safe in this government's hands. And the BBC's mission to inform, educate and entertain has worked for almost a century. So will the Secretary of State rule out today that she is not seeking to undermine and sacrifice this great national institution in order to save the Prime Minister's political skin?
I'm not, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Scott Benton.
Oh, yes, you are. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At a time when household budgets are under unprecedented pressure, the decision to freeze the licence fee will be universally welcomed in Blackpool. My constituents will also welcome the Secretary of State's comments that it is high time that we had a discussion about the very existence of the licence fee itself. But in the meantime, what discussions is the Secretary of State having with the BBC to ensure that it can achieve value for money in terms of a licence fee?
I have regular meetings with both the Director General and the Chair of the BBC and other members of this BBC to discuss those very issues.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. She says she can't tell the BBC what to do, but she also says she wants the BBC to play God Save the Queen more often. So I wonder whether she thinks today's announcement makes that more or less likely. And the BBC has also been described as the glue that holds the union together. So does slashing the BBC's funding the way she wants to going to make that glue stronger or weaker?
So I didn't hear the second part of the question, but what I would say is that what's wrong with playing God Save the Queen? What's wrong with it? The honourable gentleman asked the question as though that was a dirty word or something that I should have said. What is wrong with playing God Save the Queen?
David Simmons.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like many of my constituents are also parents of young children, I have a daily battle to guide them away from some of the content on some channels towards the relative nourishment they'll find on the BBC. So I'd like to ask my right honourable friend, as we look to the future of the BBC, in addition to the scrutiny that is rightly placed upon the financing model, what objectives she might have in mind or what process she might have in mind to ensure that the quality of the output, where the BBC is world-leading in so many areas, is maintained for the long term and for the future.
Well, that's the point of discussion, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's why, and I've said again and again, It's about how do we protect the BBC? How do we ensure that, under the agreement at the moment, and the settlement at the moment, it can continue to meet its mission and its purpose? But how do we protect the BBC going forward? How do we ensure that we have good quality content made in the UK and stays in the UK, and we can sell from the UK? And how do we, in this changing, shifting, rapidly moving landscape, how do we have a BBC that is funded for the future in order to protect it?
Chiomura.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm glad that the Secretary of State for Digital has noticed that business models for content creation have changed in the last 100 years, but the need for a unifying shared expression of British culture, identity and creativity has not. So is not the real reason for this attack on the BBC that it is a successful British public sector institution and she just can't stand that?
Yeah.
No.
Rob Butler. Sorry.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was very proud to spend the first 7 years of my career at the BBC, but it's worth remembering that even then, in the 90s, there were only 4 main terrestrial TV channels. The Secretary of State is absolutely right that the whole landscape has changed fundamentally since then, and I tend to agree with her that the licence fee must therefore be on borrowed time. But does she agree with me that any new model of funding for the long term of the BBC will also need to take into account the possible implications and repercussions on the commercial public service broadcasters that currently rely on advertising?
That's a very important point, and everything needs to be considered. All elements of all the BBC's reach, everything that it does, everything that it achieves, everything needs to be considered in the round. That is why we have to start the debate now. Even though the future funding model wouldn't come in until 2028, that's why we have to start now. We need that time to prepare now to ensure that very point that all elements which are beneficial to the UK, which are beneficial to the BBC and to producing that great British content remain.
Ben Lake.
It was pleasing to hear the Secretary of State claim that she recognises the importance of Welsh language broadcasting, but she then proceeded to announce a real terms cut to the BBC settlement, a settlement, of course, that provides around £20 million of S4C programming annually, in addition to Welsh language services on Radio Cymru, Radio Cymru 2 and Cymru Fyw. So could the Secretary of State therefore explain how a real terms cut to the BBC settlement will not see a reduction in its important contribution to Welsh language services?
So, Amanda, as the S4C settlement will consolidate S4C's current £74.5 million licence funding with its current 6.8 annual DCMS grant income, the real terms cut that he has talked about to the overall BBC, that is a fact because we have frozen the licence fee for 2 years. But S4C's funding, which has not increased for 5 years, will now increase. The BBC's funding has always, every year, increased. It will now freeze for the next 2 years, but S4C's has always been frozen for the past 5 years. It will now increase.
Jerome Mayhew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've got to accept that the media landscape, and importantly its use, has changed beyond recognition over the last few years. So I agree with Lord Grey, the former chair of the BBC, that a universal regressive tax to pay for a BBC that is no longer itself universally used is no longer defensible. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that the BBC, both now and in the future, will have a vital role to play in creating a version of our common truth, both at home and abroad?
And protecting that vital role of the BBC moving forward is one of the issues that we have to make sure that we protect, along with, as I've said, the British content that we make. The fact that the BBC is a global beacon around the world, the fact that there are people in countries, as my friend opposite has mentioned, who depend on the BBC. Maintaining the BBC is something that we have to protect, but funding the BBC and how it's funded, that is what is up for question, and that is what the discussion's about moving forward.
Claire Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm British and proud of it, and I'm proud of the BBC. The BBC reaches 468 million people in 42 languages around the world every week, and it's the envy of the world. Cutting funding to the BBC and the World Service is already leaving the path clear for Russian and Chinese influence in those countries. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that only an unpatriotic party would cut the real terms funding of this national treasure?
Unpatriotic. I don't think it was this side of the House that was laughing about the prospect of the national anthem being played on television. I think it was that side of the House that was doing that. And no, I disagree. I am not unpatriotic. I am very patriotic.
Gallus.
Trent North, Kids Grove and Talk want to see the licence fee scrapped. And when I had 3,000 respondents to a survey, 96% of them agreed with that. They feel that the BBC has spoken down to them when they voted for Brexit. They feel that it's out of touch with the people and the values of Stoke-on-Trent, North, Kids Grove and Talk. And it's time that the BBC, like the Labour Party, get out the metropolitan bubble, spend some time in Stoke-on-Trent and understand what people think. So does my right honourable agree that it's welcome that she's frozen the licence fee, it's welcome that she's opening this conversation, but it's time to scrap the licence fee altogether?
So we can all see how, once again, my honourable friend speaks up for his constituents in Stoke, and it's just, and I'm really interested in the survey, and I'd love to see some of the responses that we see from that survey. And we are looking at how he spoke not about scrapping the BBC, but about scrapping the licence fee, because I'm sure his constituents, both those who do want to watch and enjoy the BBC, it's about how do we fund the BBC in a modern digital landscape and at a time when young people consume their television in different ways. How do we fund the BBC to protect it and maintain it moving forward, but in a different way?
Brian.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish the Secretary of State would stop with the crocodile tears about the cost of living crisis, because £159 is a lot of money, in particular to my constituents, but it happens to be exactly the same amount as, on average, my constituents will be paying extra in national insurance from April of this year. So if they really cared about the cost of living crisis, they could do something about that. But what my real fear is the Secretary of State simply doesn't understand how intrinsic to the nature of the BBC and its success around the world is the licence fee. It means there's something for everybody, for all of my constituents, including the poorest member of my constituency who wouldn't be able to afford Sky. She says the BBC gets lots of money. Sky gets 5 times as much money this year, and its revenues this year have increased by 18.9%. Yes, this is an unpatriotic move, dismantling one of the greatest British treasures.
Well, I don't think I could say, I mean, my old friend talked about the 159. It's actually £180 that the BBC wanted this to project to. And this is one of the levers that we have in government in order to help hard-working families against those increasing inflationary pressures. But my old friend talked about, we're not here. We're here to help the BBC and protect the BBC. And the only way we can do that, and as I've said, I would be, well, I'll ask my honourable friend again, does she support the freeze, the 2-year freeze, the licence fee to help hard-working families? No. Again, no plan. You know, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady dodged that question on media this morning, and she's dodging it here in the chamber today.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I praise the Secretary of State for helping to tackle the rising cost of living for many families at a difficult time. And does the Secretary of State agree with me that whilst they're having to tighten their belts, perhaps the BBC should do the same? Perhaps a good place to start would be with salaries, including one of their presenters who earns £1.36 million per year.
So businesses across the UK are having to tighten their belts. Households across the UK are facing inflationary pressures and having to tighten their belts. The 2-year freeze on the licence fee means the BBC will be doing themselves. I couldn't agree with him more.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Wednesday at Prime Minister's Questions, the Prime Minister himself was challenged about the future of the licence fee, and he seemed to caution against it by referring to the BBC as a great national institution. And yet by the weekend, the Secretary of State was tweeting that this would be the last licence fee agreement. So perhaps the Secretary of State could explain to this House what on earth has been going on in Number 10 since Wednesday that has led to what appears to be a screeching U-turn.
As I've said on a number of occasions, we've been having these discussions for months. In fact, my predecessor had the discussions before me. Legally, I have to make an announcement as far in advance as April as possible, and that's why I'm here today.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend my right honourable friend for her announcement freezing the licence fee and launching an inquiry into its future? And will she confirm for me, firstly, there's a difference between impartiality and the licence fee. They're different issues.
Yeah.
Secondly, that if Netflix can go from 1/20th the size of the BBC to 8 times the size of the BBC in just 20 years, there's plenty of scope for creative thinking. And thirdly, will she encourage the leadership of the BBC to respond positively and not with a defeatist and backward-looking attitude of the Labour Party?
I thank my honourable friend and my neighbour, my constituency neighbour, for his question. And impartiality and the licence fee are two completely, entirely separate things. The Sirota review made its recommendations. The leadership of the BBC has fully agreed with those recommendations and has agreed to implement them. What we now want to see is transparency, to see what difference those implementations make, but they are completely different from the settlement of the licence fee. Two entirely different issues.
Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very proud of the BBC. I think it's the best of British, and I think it's recognised and respected across the world. I also think it's the best of value when you compare that its fee actually works out to be 2/3 the price of a pint of milk per day. Now, I happen to know what the price of a pint of milk is. Isn't there a simple truth here that actually the Prime Minister, unlike previous Prime Minister, unlike Margaret Thatcher and so many others, he's frightened of the BBC, he's frightened of being scrutinised. Margaret Thatcher actually phoned in to the Radio 4 Today programme. We have a Prime Minister who would prefer to hide in the fridge.
The Prime Minister is a huge fan of the BBC, and he's a huge fan of the BBC today. And the discussions that we're having and beginning are there to help protect the BBC, because for anyone to sit here today and think that we could go to households in 2028 and expect individuals to pay for a licence fee with fear of prosecution if they don't, in order to watch the television that they have bought and put into their house, is frankly a dinosaur. We have a responsibility in this House to protect the BBC, and as part of that responsibility we have to look forward and think, how can we change the BBC? How can we fund the BBC in a changing digital landscape?
Greg Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the chamber, we have a proud history with S4C, S4C, and today is another important step forward. Can I thank the Secretary of State for both making it S4C at the core of her statement today, but also for the £7.5 million increase per annum. And could I draw it into a meeting with myself and like-minded colleagues about the Welsh language and the fact that core public service broadcasters have nurtured it and helped grow, such as S4C and BBC Radio Cymru?
I'd be happy to, and to thank him. It's 5 years that S4C has had no increase in its funding. It was high time it did, when the BBC has had year-on-year increases in its funding.
Chris Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The family she talks of in Cumbria was streaming 5 different movies in 5 different rooms, are probably paying a minimum of £43 per month for Netflix, Sky and broadband. Included in that is not the social value the BBC provides, from educating youngsters through CBeebies and CBBC, through the company it provides to those who are suffering from loneliness, and also the innovation of the BBC iPlayer and BBC Sounds. Will she give an assurance that this freeze will not diminish those vital services the BBC provide?
The licence fee settlement of the BBC ensures that the BBC can continue to meet its mission and its purposes, and it will continue to receive billions of pounds of funding, £23 billion over the licence fee settlement.
James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When the BBC came before the Public Accounts Committee, it was striking how unambitious its target was to grow commercial revenues, which represent just 6% of its current income. Will this welcome decision, including increasing the borrowing limit which the BBC asked for, come with a requirement for them to rapidly grow that income and reduce the burden on the licence tax?
I thank my honourable friend, and increasing the access to private equity was one of the first steps in doing that.
Graham Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've already seen the loss of hundreds of BBC journalist jobs involved in the much valued regional news and current affairs programming, including the excellent Inside Out programme. Before making the decision to freeze the fee, what assessment did the Secretary of State make of the impact on local and regional news programming?
It's about increasing and reforming and increasing services across the BBC to continue into the future, to ensure that the BBC is there in the future, to service his constituents by adopting a funding model that means that the BBC will be sustainable and will be there for the long term.
Catherine Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Putting BBC documentary into YouTube is one of the ways you can get a world-class education, because you can just learn about loads of different things. But that sentence also suggests that the world's evolving. So whilst I'm a huge fan of the BBC, and I do welcome this licence fee review, and to ensure that that stuff is still there for people like me and future generations. Does she agree with me?
I agree, and she's actually really encapsulated what is the situation that we're facing at the moment. The fact that BBC documentaries are being put into YouTube and people are watching them on YouTube. In fact, young people, I'm amazed to learn, consume huge amounts of television via YouTube. This is why we have to review and start the discussions about what is the future of the BBC funding stream going to look like.
Jonathan Edwards.
Diolch, Mr Speaker. There will be considerable concern in Wales about the post-2020 situation, because the implied subscription-type model will never work for S4C or Radio Cymru or the wider BBC in Wales. Will she pledge to ensure full consultation with Welsh stakeholders to ensure that the Welsh language isn't collateral damage in the British government's culture war against the BBC?
So, I thought he was going to thank me for the additional money that S4C, the £7.5 million that we're giving to S4C, I thought he was going to thank us for the fact that S4C has had its funding frozen for the past 5 years, but now it's increasing and we're freezing the BBC. However, I have never mentioned the word subscription. And as I've said time and time again, we need to start a dialogue about how do we fund the BBC in the future.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I welcome the freeze to the licence fee and the debate that is to come? Given the millions across the United Kingdom and abroad who do love the BBC, there must be countless options for future funding models for that content which can be commercialised. But will my right honourable friend agree with me that the most important strand of any reform is to de-link the requirement in order to watch other content to pay for the BBC?
An interesting concept, and it will be part of the discussion moving forward, I'm sure.
Margaret Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is one option the Secretary of State considering to increase funding allowing the BBC to carry advertisements? And if so, has she considered the risk of that, removing the balanced fact-based basis of BBC news reporting?
So, Mr Speaker, as I said when I arrived at the dispatch box, that we are beginning the discussions about how a future funding model for the BBC will look. We've not gone into that level of discussion yet.
We now come to the next statement, which is from the Secretary of State for Defence. In calling Ben Wallace, I will not be running this long because of the nature of what's coming afterwards, but it's important for this to be taken. Ben Wallace, Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With your permission, I wanted to update the House on the situation in Ukraine. As of today, tens of thousands of Russian troops are positioned close to the Ukrainian border. Their deployment is not routine, and they are equipped with tanks, armoured fighting vehicles, rocket artillery and short-range ballistic missiles. We and our allies have legitimate and real cause for concern that the configuration and scale of the force being assembled, supported by Russian air and maritime long-range strike capabilities stationed in the region, could be used for the purpose of conducting a multi-axis invasion of Ukraine. But whatever final decision the Russian government takes on the use of such forces, their presence and levels of readiness are contributing to a destabilising and coercive atmosphere that risks miscalculation at best and at worst, conflict. Furthermore, in recent weeks, we have observed hardening Russian rhetoric, heightened cyber activity, and widespread disinformation that could serve to provide false pretext for a Russian military intervention. False narratives are very much part of the Kremlin's playbook. They were used in 2008 before Russia's invasion of Georgia and in Ukraine in 2014. False narratives are being peddled again today. Russia has suggested that their military build-up on the border of Ukraine is in response to NATO aggression and an agenda by the West to use Ukraine to divide and rule the Russian nation. They have put forward this outlandish notion that NATO is attempting to encircle Russia. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, no one is trying to rule the Russian nation. Only 1/16 of Russia shares a border with a NATO ally, and NATO is and always has been a defensive alliance. NATO at its core holds the belief that any country in the alliance, no matter how big or how small they are, is by right of membership owed a pledge of mutual defence. You attack one of us, you attack us all. From 12 founding countries in 1949, the NATO alliance has grown to a total of 30 today. These countries have joined the alliance not because NATO is making them do so, but because of the freely expressed will of the government and peoples of those countries. Countries choose NATO. NATO does not choose them. If Russia has concerns about the enlargement, it should perhaps ask itself why, when people were free to choose, they chose NATO. NATO is an alliance of like-minded nations who, as well as sharing a commitment to mutual defence, also set a share of common values, and sovereignty of other nations is respected by all. Each nation has a sovereign right to choose its own security arrangement. This is a fundamental principle of European security, one indeed to which Russia has subscribed in the past, and yet now Russia seeks a veto over who joins NATO. The new United Kingdom will stand up for the right of countries to choose their alliances. More important than the choice they make is the right to have that choice. On my recent visit to both Sweden and Finland, two non-NATO countries, it was clear that Kremlin attempts to dictate what sovereign states can or cannot choose has been rejected across the political spectrum. Mr. Speaker, I must stress, no one wants conflict. The Ukrainians are not seeking confrontation, despite the illegal annexation of their lands in Crimea and the occupation of Donbass. And I am sure ordinary Russian people who remember the first Chechnya conflict and other older conflicts don't want yet another quagmire either. Last week, there were intensive discussions on the international front to achieve a diplomatic solution to the current situation, including at NATO and the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Engagement at the NATO-Russia Council made it clear that NATO is open to dialogue with Russia on a range of issues to protect Euro-Atlantic security, including risk reduction, transparency, arms control, and lines of communication. But we will not reward aggression. And we are open to dialogue on a bilateral basis. On the 23rd of December, the Chief of Defence Staff, Admiral Tony Radakin, spoke with his Russian counterpart, General Gerasimov. In their call, they agreed the vital importance of maintaining communications to understand each other's intentions and to avoid miscalculation. When the Prime Minister spoke to President Putin on the 13th of December, he expressed the United Kingdom's deep concern over the build-up of Russian forces on Ukraine's border and also reiterated the importance of working through diplomatic channels to de-escalate tensions and identify durable solutions. The Foreign Secretary continues to engage with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, including recently in person at the margins of the OSCE Ministerial Council in Stockholm on the 2nd of December. Russia has the largest conventional force of any single nation in Europe. It has a proud history. We have fought together. We celebrated the courage of the Arctic convoys at the 80th anniversary last year. And Russia is a nuclear power. It does not have anything to fear from NATO or Ukraine or the other countries that strive peacefully on the continent of Europe. So today I'm extending, Mr. Speaker, an invitation to my Russian counterpart, Sergei Shogoi, to visit London in the next few weeks. We are ready to discuss issues related to mutual security concerns and engage constructively in good faith. The UK's position on Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, is also clear. We unequivocally support its sovereignty and territorial integrity with its international recognised borders, including Crimea. Ukraine is an independent, sovereign country of proud, independent Ukrainian people. The UK Ministry of Defence already has a long-standing relationship with our Ukrainian counterparts, and we continue to provide support in many areas, including security assistance and defence reform. Since 2015, the UK has helped to build the resilience and capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces through Operation Orbital, which has trained over 22,000 Ukrainian troops. And we maintain the right to deliver bilateral support to a sovereign nation when requested in areas that will better help them defend themselves. It is important that Ukraine has the capability to defend itself. After Ukraine lost large parts of its navy to Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea, it became important to help Ukraine build up and sustain naval capability. And we should not forget, Mr. Speaker, the thousands of Ukrainians who have lost their lives defending their country and who every day are murdered by snipers from across the divide. That is why in 2019 I expanded Operation Orbital to include a naval cooperation. And that is why last year we agreed a range of measures, including supplying Ukraine with 2 mine countermeasure vessels, as well as agreeing the joint production of 8 new ships equipped with modern weapon systems, defensive weapon systems. And as I said in the House last week, the framework agreement presented to Parliament in November 2021 affirmed the principles that the UK will provide both training and defensive capabilities to Ukraine to help them better defend themselves. Within that same principle, I can today confirm to the House that in light of the increasingly threatening behaviour from Russia, and in addition to our current support, the UK is providing a new security assistance package to increase Ukraine's defensive capabilities. We have taken the decision to supply Ukraine with light anti-armour defensive weapon systems. A small number of UK personnel will provide early-stage training for a short period of time within the framework of Operational Orbital before returning to the United Kingdom. This security assistance package complements the training and capabilities that Ukraine already has, and those that are also being provided by the UK and other allies in Europe and the United States. Ukraine has every right to defend its borders, and this new package of aid further enhances its ability to do so. Let me be clear. This support are for short-range and clearly defensive weapon capabilities. They are not strategic weapons and pose no threat to Russia. They are to use in self-defence. And the UK personnel providing the early-stage training, as I've said, will return to the United Kingdom after completing it. The Prime Minister has been clear that any destabilising action by Russia in Ukraine would be a strategic mistake that would have significant consequences. That is why there is a package of international sanctions ready to go that will make sure that Russian government is punished if it crosses the line. But the cost of an invasion will not just be felt by the West. I visited Ukraine 5 times since 2016, and I know that the Ukrainian people are proud and will stand and fight for their country, for democracy and for freedom.